Welcome to the Urban Complex, a system of interrelated emotion-charged ideas, feelings, memories, and impulses. This name takes us and lays out what a listener should expect, a podcast where ideas, feelings, and memories collide, leading towards meaningful change. All opinions by Chris Richardson, Dominic Papa, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Arizona State University or the Arizona Commerce Authority. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for decisions. Any endorsement or messages from sponsors are solely supporting the production of this podcast. There are no relationships further than the podcast purposes with any sponsor unless separately created with another entity. Enjoy the Urban Complex. Smarter cities for a stronger tomorrow.
Hey, Dom.
What's going on, Chris? Here we are again. What is this?
Yeah, it's episode 3. What's going on? I see something different today. You got some curtains. Are you trying to hide something?
I knew this was going to happen. What is this going to be, like a running joke about our backgrounds? It's going to be great. No, I'm actually up, trying to take an early weekend, get up here to Jerome. It's ghost town. So I'm in the haunted hotel down in downtown Jerome. It's actually, I thought it was funny that I was going to have to do the podcast from here today because there's such a funny juxtaposition between, the haunted town of Jerome and here we are talking about smart cities. In fact, even the guy at the lobby when we were checking in was talking about, don't bother us unless you see the headless horseman running down your hall. And then if you do, shout as loud as you can so we can all get the heck out of here. So I thought it was going to be funny doing the podcast from Jerome. It's gorgeous up here, by the way.
Well, did you use the advantage? Did they recognize you as the co-host of the Urban Complex and give you a free night?
I tried. I was like, do I get special treatment? Is there VIP? No.
Come on, work that. Well, let's just hope it. I have heard a ton of it. Let's hope the lights don't go out or something on the podcast. That'd be horrible.
I know. Let's just hope the Wi-Fi can stand up. We are recording this. But I think it's funny. It might be a haunted hotel, but they've got great Wi-Fi to do a podcast. Gotta love it.
Nice.
All right. Who are we interviewing today? Who's on our podcast?
So this one's big. It's not a city, but it definitely is an individual that knows cities and definitely their police departments. It's Rick Smith. He's the CEO of Axon, and he also wrote a really amazing book called The End of Killing. It's funny. I'd seen him. Axon is a local company, so it's one that I've looked up to. Phoenix doesn't have a ton of born and raised companies, but Axon's one of those that's amazing. And I also met him before at a Governor Ducey sponsored Waste Management Open event, and that's where I got his book. But it was funny. I was up over the holidays, up skiing at Snowbowl in Flagstaff, and I'm like, Rick? He's like, hey, and I'm like, hey, yeah, it's Chris. I'm with ASU, and I just started a podcast called The Urban Complex. We've had some great guests. You would be amazing. He's like, introduced me as kids and said I'd be happy to. And so that's how Rick's joined us. And I have a funny feeling that our listeners are going to love this episode. So yeah. That's it.
I love it. I'm excited. This is going to be great. I've obviously looked up to him as well. And that's what I love about the ecosystem that's in Arizona. And I think the ecosystem we're trying to build through this podcast, you never know who you're going to run into and the amount of influencers that are out there that are doing great things. And I think especially after having Mark and Rosa on talking about governments pivoting, I think he's going to probably have a good story about how they pivoted in the recent past. So this is going to be great. Stay tuned.
True. Cool. Well, let's get him on. Thanks, Dom.
Here we go.
Rick, please let Dom and I welcome you to the Urban Complex.
Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me here in virtual space. We're all Zooming together.
We are excited. Yeah, it'll have the YouTube delivery so they can see this, but also obviously the podcast delivery. I think what's great is just help our guest audience know a bit about you. So just tell us some information about you personally, and obviously we'll get to the company, Axon, and your book over time. But tell us about you as an individual and kind of your background and how you got here.
Yeah, so I'm the son of a serial entrepreneur who probably failed 4 times for every time he succeeded. But he had some decent sized successes. And the thing I noticed growing up is my dad was always happier struggling at a startup than when he would have to go recover with a job at some bigger company. And so I got the bug relatively early on. And then when I was in graduate school, 2 of my friends were shot and killed in a road rage incident at the Hyatt Regency in Scottsdale in the parking lot. And the guy who killed them actually was not the stereotypical, thug criminal. It was a businessman who had a gun in the glove box. Wow. And as I thought about that, I was living in Europe at the time in grad school. It really struck me that first, gun violence is actually a big problem that touches many people in the United States. It's not just, the other guy, it touches every one of us. And in that case, 3 lives were ruined that day. My 2 friends died, and the other individual is now spending his life in prison. And so as I, sort of thought about that situation, about gun violence in general, the thing that just struck me was, wait a minute, why are we still shooting bullets at people? That's like a medieval technology. It's been around for 4 or 5 centuries. And so I got very passionate about applying my interest in entrepreneurship in the space of basically public safety, how to protect people, and how to do it without causing more violence. Right up until now, defending yourself has been hurting or killing somebody else. And you just got to be a Star Trek fan to realize, you can imagine other ways you could do this that don't require you to kill somebody. And so I ended up, this is like right out of a comic book. I ended up finding the inventor of the TASER weapon. It predated me.
Wow.
Was a NASA scientist who was living about an hour away from where my parents lived. He'd retired, was kind of this super smart, semi-crazy inventor type. And so
hour away from your parents.
Yeah, in Tucson, Arizona.
Wow.
And so to find him, I dialed 411, and I have to explain to people now what that is, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's why I laugh. Don probably doesn't know, by the way.
So I found his name in a patent at the ASU Law Library, and I just went home, dialed 411. Next thing I know, I'm talking to the guy. The next day I'm standing on his front porch. He's 73, I'm 23. He's this NASA scientist. I'm this like snot-nosed kid right out of college. And I convinced him. It took me about 3 weeks to convince him to give it another shot. But he came out of retirement, and
every day you're knocking on the door for 3 weeks.
I was calling every other day. I had to give him some time to adjust, but I eventually convinced him to give it a go. And so we started in his garage building tasers. What a magical experience that was, looking back on it, right? This guy was one of the lead scientists on the Apollo project, and I'm building advanced energy weapons in his garage. He probably could have built a nuclear weapon if he really wanted to, with parts from Ace Hardware. And that started a life's journey, and here I am. It'll be 28 years this year.
Wow.
That's
all right. Well, so then why don't you tell us a little bit about the company too? Axon, formerly TASER, it started there in the garage. Tell us kind of about that amazing transformation. 28 years and here you are.
Yeah. So I would say our first 2 product launches were abject failures. So between 93 and 99, it was a train wreck. My friends from college were making fun of me. My mom at one point was not talking to me because I basically wiped out my dad financially. We got to a point where, literally he owed the money. He owed the bank more. Well, our company owed the bank more money than he was worth. He had guaranteed the loan personally. But we managed to turn it around. And the key moment, we'd started in the consumer space because we were thinking, hey, people should have an alternative to guns to defend themselves. And we were really struggling there. So we pivoted and we went into law enforcement, primarily because our theory was people will believe it works if they see police using it. So we have to go win the professional users first, and then we'll come back to the consumer market. And here I am now, 21 years after that decision, and we've built a really big business selling to police and to government agencies. And we have a relatively small consumer business. It's finally starting to tick, where I think people are now seeing, oh, hey, wait a minute, there are other ways. Maybe I don't want to kill somebody if I want to protect myself in my house or in my car.
no,
So I guess to round it out, so that's the TASER. So I would say between 2000 and 2010, that was the year of just building the TASER business. And then that became pretty ubiquitous. And then we learned that TASERs, it turns out, are pretty controversial, right? Don't tase me, bro. Those 2000.
It took the hangover to tell you that?
Yeah, well, that was the Yale whatever, the people who picked the new phrase of the year. We got it in 2007 for Don't Tase Me, Bro. And so we basically started making body cameras. We realized, there's a lot of people that have concerns about how police are using these. Rather than argue about this sort of cops are good or cops are bad, let's record it And the truth is probably more nuanced. There's probably some good cops and some bad ones. So we started the body camera business around 2010. And then we realized relatively quickly that the real power of this business was never going to be selling cameras, but all the data that you would collect off of these and how you could basically transform the way police document their incidents, not only to defend themselves if there's a case of alleged abuse, but ultimately police spend about half of their time writing reports, which adds zero value. So you take 50% of any police agency's budget and half of it is just going into bureaucratic, zero value add tasks. So we're now really focused on how do we unlock all these incidents and make the video effectively the police report so we can keep cops out doing their job. And of course, building tools that help agencies make every cop a better cop, find it if there's bad ones, find them and get them either retraining or into a new career. There's just a whole lot of problems I think the world is focused on around policing right now. And we find ourselves in this amazing position that we are the tech stack that is in a position to do something about helping to transform the way policing is done.
Well, that's amazing. That's what's amazing to me. I was on your products page, the Axon's products page, and it's just stunning to see. It's not just the TASER, obviously. It's not just the body camera, but it's this entire array of hardware, all these software and data products. It's really amazing. And you had the foresight to get ahead of that with the name change in Axon. Is there any story there in why that name? I mean, my father was a neurologist, so I have a funny feeling. I know a little bit of why part of it, but or any kind of funny story behind it, because it's not always easy to make those changes. I'm guessing that could be an interesting one.
Yeah. So
Smart Cities part.
Yeah. So your instinct is right. So my undergraduate degree was in biology with a focus in neurobiology. I wanted to build robotic limbs, like Luke Skywalker's robotic arm, and so I was fascinated by the concept of the human machine interface. And so I studied neurobiology, and then that actually became quite useful when I became involved with the TASER, because it's basically a nerve stimulator. The way we incapacitate you is we overwhelm your nervous system. And it turns out the part of your nerves that actually connect to each other is a fiber called an axon. And that's where the name came from. So when we launched our camera business, we said, well, we think the camera is interesting, but it's really the connected nature where this is like a nerve cell collecting information. We got to send it back to the brain. And so we chose the name Axon to sort of as a tip of hat to the neurobio geeks out there. And then we, as we were growing, we discovered the name TASER is a sledgehammer of a brand. People love it or they hate it. Cops tend to have really positive feelings about it. I can't tell you how many times I've been hugged by police officers telling me, hey, thank you. I did not kill someone because I had a TASER. And then similarly, on the other side of the spectrum, people who maybe are not as supportive of police or more critical of them will tend to have a negative view of TASER. And we found that the name is so strongly associated with the TASER weapon.
Right.
It's hard when you're doing other things. So we'd go into a meeting and I'd say, hey, I'm the CEO of TASER. And they'd be, wait, we're here to talk about software. What are you doing here? and it just got to be a bit of a distraction. So we decided to make TASER the name, the brand of the product. And then we up-leveled Axon to be the name of the company, which felt like it was a bigger tent. We could talk about cameras. We can talk about cloud software. We can talk about AI tools. We can talk about TASER weapons. Great. And it actually made it easier to recruit. We have one of the largest tech teams in Seattle. So we're recruiting against, Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook. Maybe not the largest tech teams, but we were voted the geekiest office in Seattle, which, kind of matters. You got to have some geek cred when you're fighting for developers. And we found a lot of software developers had a negative reaction to the idea that they'd be working at a weapon company as opposed to a tech company. So this was all part of a repositioning. And now software and cameras is a bigger part of the business than the TASER devices.
Great.
That's phenomenal, Rick. What a great background. And as you know, the Urban Complex, it's a podcast about smart cities. So we have a lot of city managers, CIOs, police chiefs that listen in. And I think we can already start to see how your technologies are transforming the way local governments are delivering services, specifically within public safety. But let's take a step back just for a moment, because I would love to get your kind of gut feeling on what smart cities means to you, because it's one of the, the funny things about this space is you ask 10 mayors what smart cities mean to them, and you're going to get 12 answers, right? Because everyone has a different opinion. And once they hear someone talk about it, they're going to change their opinion to think something else. So I think our listeners would love to hear kind of the entrepreneurial mindset around what smart cities means to you. And then we'll kind of dive into how you're working with specific police forces.
You didn't tell me there was going to be a test. I'm going to fail.
Yeah. No pressure. You might set the standard for what smart cities is. No pressure.
Smart cities is the idea of using technology and instrumentation to understand large communities of people, almost as if it was a macroorganism. So you get thousands or millions of people living together, and you have all of these individually intelligent beings and very little intelligence about what's happening among and between and around them. And I think smart cities is about creating sort of intelligence among communities of people that try to make them able to make better group decisions, whether it's how you route traffic, how you protect people from emerging, threats, how you communicate when there's some sort of incident, how you handle things like contact tracing when you have pandemics that break out. I think it's just the whole gamut of adding intelligence across groups of people.
Watch out, audience. Under the Axon umbrella, something tells me there's something ticking. There's more opportunity for Axon with that answer.
Yeah, exactly. And so, Rick, can you tell us a little bit? You've already kind of delved into how Axon is working with cities, specifically the police forces within those cities. But are there opportunities to make that kind of relationship, those opportunities even better? Like, were there any surprising influencers that you found along your way in your journey from going kind of to consumer to local government as a customer that helped, really drive this momentum and this technology forward? What's been the challenges of working with local government, and what's been maybe the surprises with working with local government?
So one thing I would say that I was surprised to learn, and I think has been fairly influential for us in terms of our strategy, is that local government is really not structured well to implement and create technology. And the reason I say that is you've got there's a bunch of constraints when you're in government around anti-corruption, the way things are purchased, around employee rights and change management, that are all things that are important in a democratic society. But especially when you're rolling out new technology, frankly, there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to work. I'll give you one example. So when we were creating our first body cameras in cloud, we basically committed that, we'd worked with enough, especially small agencies. We realized if every agency has to install a video server and we have to manage that through 18,000 different cities, 18,000 different IT departments, it's literally impossible to do. And we had learned that cities would fall very far behind in their technology implementations. And I'll give you an example of a reason that we learned why. So in our case, we said, okay, we're going to do this cloud approach. So we went out and we bought $6 million worth of computer servers. And 6 months into it, we had a near catastrophic failure where we had a corruption in the software. It corrupted the pointer system, which in your software tells you where all the data is. So without the pointer system, you basically have a bunch of stuff you don't know how to organize, and it literally could have lost all of our customers' data. And I'd just gotten a new board member, this guy, Hadi Partovi, who was transformative for us. And I remember in his first board meeting, Hadi sat back in his chair and he said, "Why are you guys running a data center? Like, that's not your specialty. Like, Amazon is this web service thing. Like, you could pay them a fraction of what you're paying, and they don't screw up things like their pointer systems because they've got large teams, they're best in the world, da, da, da." And I realized, crap, he's right. So we had to then make a decision. We're a public company. We just spent $6 million. If we're going to make this change, we literally have to go throw those servers in the ocean because you can never resell them for any, you get pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, I was going to say 15 cents on the dollar.
So we did. So we took a write-off for $6 million, and it was painful as a public company. But I remember talking to some of my city customers, and they said, if that ever happened in a city, that change would never have happened, because the system, like, now you have too many people with a vested interest who had purchased this. Like, literally, it would be a scandal that would potentially bring down people's careers, because just the scrutiny that happens in government is intolerant of those kinds of mistakes. People will assume malfeasance and other issues. And so you end up with a mistake that gets made, gets perpetuated potentially for decades. And I remember talking to one major police department, a very well known one in the world, that a few years ago was still running a record management system that was written using a language that was not really supported anymore. It was literally like the early 1990s air traffic, or airline reservation systems. And when I asked him, well, how did you end up there? He said, look, you end up hiring 50 employees who know how to deal with this thing, and then you can't change them out if their job skills become irrelevant, and you've got all this. It's really, really hard to admit big mistakes and go in a different direction. And then the organizational dynamics make it impossible.
Completely. Yeah. And we're actually hearing that from the podcast guests that we brought on, these city officials saying they're trying to change that culture, and they're trying to learn how to pivot in unique ways to respond to situations. So that might be a perfect segue into kind of the next question I wanted to ask you. So, obviously we know that 2020 was such a tumultuous year that, especially on the public safety front, and then obviously with COVID and everything else. And so it actually forced some of the local governments, especially the ones we work with, to kind of think quickly, act quickly, respond quickly. Did you see that from the Axon side? Did you see local governments kind of trying to shake the chains and think fast, act fast?
Oh, yeah.
And do you think it's something that will, hopefully they'll learn that, we can do this and move and keep that attitude moving forward?
Well, that second one's a little harder to say. If crisis forces change to happen.
Sure.
A year ago, I could maybe count on one hand the number of times I had ever Zoomed with a customer. Like, it just wasn't done. This idea of, like, if you ask people if you want to do a video conference, they say, what? No, we don't have that. They're like,
get on a plane. Get on a plane.
Get on a plane. It was almost like considered an insult. Like, hey, wait, if I'm an important customer, you'll get on a plane and come see me. Yeah. So for me, one of the incredible bright spots of this pandemic is my productivity is literally up more than 10x in terms of customer interactions. I used to do 5 customer meetings a month. Now I'm doing 5 a day. And I see my kids every night. It's that part's been fantastic. My wife, now, she may have a different viewpoint on having me around this much. The other thing I would say that's sort of interesting about this, just to kind of also tie back in my last answer, or my last question. So because of the way cities are structured to ensure there's a lot of aversion to risk and corruption, which is good. Early on, when we started coming and saying, hey, we're a cloud service provider, there was a lot of fear, like, oh, wait a minute, you're going to own our data, and we won't be able to go anywhere. And now there is some risk of that. So you need to make sure you've got the right contracts in place, that it is your data. You can take it, whenever you want and go, and make sure it's a credible organization you're dealing with. But if you cross your T's and dot your I's, it actually can be far less risky. And what I mean by that is, like, so we started on Amazon Web Services. Microsoft came to us and said, hey, we really want you on Azure. And because in the cloud, there's so much standardization, we ultimately said, okay, Microsoft had some advantages for our marketplace, and they helped us move all the data over. For a police agency or any government agency, if you have a good, reputable cloud provider and you decide you want to go in a different direction, it's actually far easier. You get to a point where you're ready, you go out, you do a competitive process. Okay, we're going to go from Amazon to Microsoft. I guarantee, or if you're on Axon and let's say somebody else has a new, better system, it's way easier to port stuff in the cloud than for every tech vendor to go out to 18,000 different cities, send people on site. Okay, now what was customized here? Like, each one becomes like brain surgery. So I actually think for cities, they're getting more and more comfortable, where almost all of them now are requiring cloud, and they're getting much more sophisticated to make sure they've got the right protections, because it actually makes them far more agile to be able to shift direction. It's way easier to change vendors than to replace a bunch of people because you want to go in a different direction and throw out a bunch of city assets that aren't fully amortized.
I've been grinning as you've answered this question, because it's part of why Dom and I started this podcast, Urban Complex, because we see that resistance to change, but a lot of it's structural. And we know if we can get the stories out there that give inspiration and dig in deep of how it's done, it helps build community around change, and it can help move. Before we move, I know, Dom, you probably have another question on this line, but I want to make sure, like you mentioned all this tech talent in Seattle, but before we miss the last question, I mean, Seattle was an epicenter for what was going on with the police movement. I mean, like that entire city block, I mean, that had to have taught you all something about the police movement, and with Black Lives Matter, like, other than getting some change, like how did Axon react when that was coming to the forefront? I mean, it was a really tumultuous time. Is there anything that you can speak to there? Because it's so front and center right now, and it got polarizing, but it seems like if done right, it can propel your company forward.
Yeah, I would say on an individual level, for me, it was it caused a whole bunch of interesting conversations with some of my Black colleagues and coworkers. I'd sort of felt like racism was gone. Like it's not really a thing we have to worry about. And I think the events of the past year, and again, talking with my colleagues, no, it's really not. It's more subtle. It's not the official, segregation of the Old South. And in retrospect, thinking about it, yeah, I guess going from a society where one group of people literally owned the others as slaves, in a few generations, you're going to have aftershocks. And so for us as an organization, it really got us thinking about diversity and inclusion. Maybe it's less of a checkbox exercise than maybe it was a few years ago. You start to get more passionate about it, that, hey, we really do, there is work to be done to really make sure that we're being open and inclusive, and really kind of helping elevate everybody in society. And we're seeing very productive conversations in policing around that as well. Police do deal with the aftershocks as well, where there's huge income disparities between white and Black communities in the country, and police end up inheriting a lot of those problems, and they end up on the front line dealing with it. Now, so look, there's been extremism all over the place in the past 12 months. And I think I like to hope that what happened at the Capitol building is hopefully the fever breaking, where it's like finally it got so kind of ridiculous and crazy that I'm hoping people are just going to take a step back and say, you know what, burning things and breaking things and all this violent aggression towards each other isn't the way to solve these things. But we are seeing a lot of opportunities where, look, I mean, police are also generally potentially 100-year-old organizations, and change comes difficult. So some of the negative energy out of the George Floyd and some of the other deaths have really created another crisis moment that's pushing, agencies to reevaluate how they're doing things. And for us, that creates an interesting opportunity. And look, we want to feel like we're doing something here too, not just selling stuff out of our warehouse. And so we've kind of pivoted a lot of our efforts on how do we help agencies do a better job? Because police reform is great in concept, but when you're actually going to do it, you're going to need technology in terms of how you're training people, how you're tracking it, how you're identifying which officers might be at risk of potentially, losing it. Like in the case of that George Floyd incident, I'd be very curious to learn what happened. Like that officer was in a mental state that was not good. Clearly, the way he was treating George Floyd, and I know that's a bit of an understatement, but could you begin to see those patterns before it becomes catastrophic? So there's all sorts of interesting technological angles that can really make a positive difference. And I'll just give you an example. One, because of this, we did what we called Sprint for Justice. We shut down the company for 2 weeks to work on 8 specific projects that were all justice-related initiatives. One of which was to create technology to transcribe every video and be able to surface the ones that have racial epithets or other aggressive language for supervisory review. Which, if you want to reform police department, having finding which incidents need to be reviewed is probably one of the foundational measures.
Great answer. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I would love to share that if that's, public with our listeners so they could see it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a year ago, if I asked the police department, so look, we're managing millions and millions of videos in evidence.com, our cloud system. And many agencies had policies that would say, we're going to do random video reviews. So every supervisor has to watch 3 videos at random. And a year ago, when I would talk with customers, say, hey, you're not going to find much like watching random videos. Most videos, nothing happens. It's a very small percentage. What if we could help you find those videos by, again, transcribing them and finding words that might indicate there's a conflict happening? Nope. Nope, we don't want to do that, because just the union and management have negotiated and we're going to do random. Now, just a year later, every agency in the country is saying, no, we absolutely want to find the meaningful videos. So now we're doing things like every time a gun comes out of a holster, that can be scored. And maybe that's a video a supervisor should review. Anytime a taser is armed, anytime certain keywords are used. So this has been a great example, as you guys know, change does not come easy in government circles. So to go from a year ago where it was 100% no to now 100% of agencies are pushing aggressively for this kind of technology. I've never seen anything move as fast.
But once it does, it comes quick. We've got some really interesting projects through my day job with ASU, with the city of Tempe, and they're getting some AI capabilities. It's just exciting. That's a great story.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And so Rick, that's a perfect example of a smart city initiative. Are there any other kind of smart city initiatives that maybe have popped up on your radar that you're aware of anywhere else in the world, either done by the local jurisdiction or maybe by companies such as yourselves that are serving those cities that pique your interest? Anything maybe, any stories?
So of course, I'm going to be mostly familiar with what my customers are doing, just 'cause that's the little world I live in. There was a really interesting one yesterday. I was on with the chief of the Texas Medical Center. And so we rolled out live streaming body cameras. So these new body cameras, they've been out coming up on 2 years now. And they can connect through LTE, right? And they can stream live videos and alerts. And I've been, again, I'm a sci-fi guy. I'm like, didn't you guys see the movie Aliens, right? Like they're able to live stream video from down in the reactor core. Of course you want to do this. But we run into, there's just a lot of challenges. Again, a lot of it is, well, this is new, the line level cop. I'm not sure I want my supervisor to be watching me. Is it kind of big brother-ish? There's some privacy issues that always come up. Anyway, so I'm talking to this police chief from this medical center in Texas, and it's a police force that works in a huge medical facility. And he said that for the last few months, they started live video streaming every call for service. And he said it's been absolutely transformative because now what's happening, the dispatchers, imagine a dispatcher trying to figure out what's happening. There's some critical incident, and all you're hearing is little snippets over a radio on a channel that's shared by 4 other squads that are at 4 other incidents. Or you can watch a live video stream and kind of see what's happening. And he gave a couple great examples, one of which was the dispatcher heard a thud and said, hey, Officer Johnson, did you hear that? He dropped something. And the officer, in being in the middle of everything, hadn't noticed it. Turns out the guy had a gun and had dropped it to the floorboard and kicked it under the seat in his car. And it turned out that was, obviously a pretty important piece of information to know, which I hadn't even thought of that use case, that what they're finding is by having the dispatchers tune in, they're seeing and hearing different things than the officers are. Because look, their life is not at risk. They're in a different mental state than the cop who's on the scene. And the other thing he shared was, instead of doing post-incident review, which is where my mind had been focused and all the things we talked about so far, he said, we're basically doing real live review of every incident as it's happening. And so we're actually intervening as the event's unfolding. So like, imagine you had a dispatcher hearing, I can't breathe, right? That dispatcher might reach over and say, hey, we need a supervisor. You should tap into this live stream and see what's going on. And there would have been plenty of time in that incident, of course, to intervene. Now, we haven't seen anything that dramatic, but that call yesterday was one of the most exciting calls I've had in the past 6 months, where there's that moment when you feel like, oh, wait a minute, we built the tech, but we hadn't seen it being used this way. This guy just discovered something. And I have a feeling it's going to spread like wildfire based on what I heard
Yeah,
yesterday.
that's when you know you've hit the mark. When you know you've got a platform and your customers are coming up with uses you would have never thought. That's great. Great story. Hey, I see over your right shoulder a book here. I know when we first met at Governor Ducey's Innovation Week at the Waste Management Open, you passed out The End of Killing. I thought it was a great book, how our newest technologies can solve humanity's oldest problems. Tell us about that. How can you highlight the book for our smart city audience? What's it about? Kind of what?
Yeah, so this was a fun and candidly kind of a risky project when I wrote it, because this was our coming out party where we basically said, hey, we sell tasers to all these police around the world, but it's not really used as a defensive weapon yet. They still carry their firearms, and this is where we came out and said, look, our goal isn't just to be a great super pepper spray. We actually want to make the bullet obsolete. Our goal is to give you something so effective that you'll stop using your gun. And when we published this, I kind of hunched down, I waited. I mean, you could get a very negative reaction, right? Police officers have a very intimate relationship with their firearm because it is their lifeline, right? This is the thing that when everything else goes bad, this is the thing that will get me home. And I was very careful to say, look, we don't want to take away anybody's gun. We just want to give you something better. And I've been shocked at how receptive police have been. I think partially there have been these societal changes happening as well right now, where police killings are, they've always been bad, but now they're so public. And I think, when I was a kid, this idea of cops and robbers, right? You've got the cops are out to kill or capture the bad guys. Well, I think we're seeing in the real world, there aren't that many actual bad guys. There's a lot more people with mental health problems, and the world is complicated. And in most of these situations, it's a tragedy on many angles. So I've been really shocked at how well police have responded to this idea. And I've set the goal for our team. We will build a taser weapon that will outperform a 9mm by 2030, by the end of this decade. And I've actually seen some of the prototypes that get us probably all the way there. Might take one more rev after that.
Well, didn't you even? I was doing some research on your site, and blows me away. I was with Honeywell for 12 years. I spent a lot of time in Morristown, New Jersey, and from what I know of the city of Newark, no offense to Newark, it's not known as a very overtime safe place. But I see correctly that the city of Newark had 0 police shots from guns in the year of 2020. How did that happen?
I think, a lot of credit goes to the police department themselves. I'd obviously love to take some credit that we give them other options and other tools. A lot of it goes into, how they're training their officers. Actually, that's another area we're actually really excited about right now is the way you train police officers historically has been fairly gun centric. And as tech changes, you also need to change 100%. The way. So we're doing a lot with virtual reality now to try to help train some newer techniques around how to, an officer can, through the way they're interacting, they can talk somebody out of a confrontation, or they can talk them into it. And they might end up fully legally justified using lethal force, but in a situation that was totally avoidable. And I think what we're seeing now is much less focus on, hey, we just, we escalate when we need to. There's way more focus on de-escalation. The one other thing I'd say on the end of killing side is it's not just about weapons, but it is about intelligence, right? If you can have better crime deterrence with things like CCTV cameras and better accountability, you get less crime in the first place. The number one thing you can do to reduce crime is increase the probability that you're going to get caught and that there's going to be real repercussions. Now that gets into a giant complex issue around privacy matters and all of that. But I think ultimately we will never be able to go back to privacy as it existed in the 1950s. That world doesn't exist. So we need to figure out what is the right level of privacy for the world we live in today. And I don't think it's that all these cameras are a sensor to nowhere where the data can't be used. Now, on the other end, we also don't want it to be George Orwell's dream where we're tracking everybody all the time, everywhere they go. But the governance around how that data between those two extremes, so we can catch the serial killers, deter the rapists and criminals, and protect everybody else's privacy, leads to some really interesting discussions around tech and public policy.
Yeah, and I love that part in the book. And the second half, you really dug into some deep things like public safety, school safety, surveillance itself. And I'm curious, like from your vantage, what advice do you have to mayors, city managers, CIOs? You talked a little bit how tough it is for them to change the way they're structured, but how should they be exploring privacy and pushing the envelope to break through? Because I think that's a really important piece. As you talked about, as well as talent coming in, we need the best and brightest involved. I think people like Dom and I that love this industry see opportunity. I think we're going to have more people coming out of college and getting into space. Like, how can they help, and how can new mayors and new city managers really kind of embrace this differently? Because I think that's a big opportunity.
So I would say this: number one is just be transparent.
Mm.
You know, there was I believe it was the city of Orlando was doing some testing with some facial recognition technology. And I don't know the details, but the way it blew up in the media, it came across to the public as if this was being done, sort of behind closed doors in a non-transparent way. And again, I don't know what actually happened, but I know the public repercussions were pretty rough. And so to the degree, like when we deploy TASER weapons, they're really not controversial anymore. They're pretty well accepted. But in the early days, we learned it was important to have agencies go out and hold a news conference and have some officers get shot with it to demonstrate it and answer the questions before people saw it out on the streets in the wild. And more recently, we created an AI ethics board about a little over 2 years ago, partially because we realized we have all this data. And we bought an artificial intelligence company to help build our team. All right, how do we start unlocking the value in the data? And the day we announced it, I'm on the front page of like TechCrunch or a bunch of different, online blogs, really negative stories, right?
Oh.
Axon is going to put face recognition on every camera, and then, privacy is the thing of the past. And we were getting so much blowback. I reached out for some advice to various advisors, and we formulated a plan to create an AI ethics board that would help us vet our technology before we put any AI technology out. And to be totally candid, part of this was kind of PR, right? It's okay, how do we deal with all this blowback? Because we know we're going to be like, we're good people. We're not going to do something bad. We just need to tell that story to the world. But then what I learned after we formed this AI ethics board is they would ask a bunch of questions I hadn't really thought of very deeply about what could go wrong. And I realized, oh man, it is way better to have those conversations now when I can still do something about it than after we've launched the product and then I've just got to argue that they're wrong. And one of the outcomes of that is we actually decided not to deploy facial recognition technology. Now, we didn't say forever, but until there were accuracy issues. I mean, we realized we'd have so many false alarms. It would be not a great user experience. It could create some catastrophic bad outcomes. It didn't perform well across different races, which is obviously incendiary. And then there's privacy issues. How do you handle the data, right? Do we want to use face recognition to look for terrorists on the FBI watch list in an airport? Sure, I think everybody agrees we want to do that. Do we want to track the identity of every person who goes to a medical clinic that treats people for HIV or goes to a political rally or pick your poison? Well, absolutely not. We don't want to be tracking those things. And we realized, all right, we better take a step back and number one, let the technology mature and let the legal situation mature. And we need to get a lot smarter on what sorts of controls we'd put in place. Anyway, it's a long-winded answer of saying, I think for a lot of cities, especially if you're in a city where there's different relationships with law enforcement, right? If you're in Seattle, there's a lot more skepticism than if you're in a small town, in a different part of the country. And I would say having an independent board that's overseeing and participating on behalf of the community before police are rolling technology out can be a really important step. And yes, it's painful, and there's, you have to answer a ton of questions, and at times it can be tiring. But I think that's just what success needs to look like, because you want to roll it out, understanding those concerns and having good answers and having put the right policy in place before you roll it out. Because once you do, if you get it wrong, that can be pretty catastrophic. And in a democratic society, that can be a career ender for elected officials.
Big time. But, you started with transparency, and then you talked at the end about putting the elements around you to make the right decisions. I mean, it's amazing. I've done some research into Axon's board. You've talked a few times about AI. I mean, you brought in some of the best Facebook and Oculus folks on your board. You've got, ironically, I was at Honeywell. Adrian Brown was the CEO when I was in my first job at Honeywell Turbo Technologies. You've got Forescout, so IoT experts, SpaceX experience. It's amazing what's there. So I think you're also doing the same at Axon. So we're going to switch gears as we kind of wrap up. I mean, we'd keep you on forever, but I know you're a busy guy running a public company, and you got probably 3 more customers to talk to this afternoon. So, but we have 2 questions we kind of ask all of our guests, and I always kind of have a hunch when I ask this as I hear, but is there anyone that you feel was really instrumental in your journey? That we focus on appreciation. We know these things are hard. We know that you need help along the way. Is there anyone you want to recognize that's helped you and or Axon?
I would say there's 3. I mean, there's a ton. I've got a fantastic team of people I work with. But if I had to just name the few top ones, my dad was just a phenomenal mentor and literally went to the edge of financial insolvency to support this, and then coached me through my first couple decades. So he's been phenomenal. And then there's 2 other ones that have they may not realize how influential they've been, and that's Ray Kurzweil,
Cool.
the futurists,
Yeah.
and Peter Diamandis, the founder of the X Prize. And together, the 2 of them formed a group called Singularity University in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Where when we began our transformation, we were a weapon company effectively, and we've been very successful here, but we knew we had to evolve. And I saw a documentary on Ray Kurzweil, and just, he has got some fairly radical ideas about the future. The main one being the law of exponential acceleration, right? That change is coming and it's accelerating. So I ended up going to take a week-long course there, and it was transformative for my thinking. And then I've put probably 150 of our senior leaders through that course. And for any organization where if you feel your org is getting stale, I think it's just a phenomenal, mind-bending experience to go into the heart of Silicon Valley and sit through a week-long. When I was there, it was 2013, and they had the head of the Google car project. This is when it was barely even known to the public, talking about autonomous vehicles. And then the guy who'd invented 3D printing, talking about additive manufacturing. So that for us has been really kind of helpful to continually question ourselves and institute a sense of paranoia. That no matter how good you are, there's some kid in a dorm right now who is going to light you up if you aren't on your game, and changing who you are tomorrow has got to be different than who it is today.
A great answer. Their abundance and feature loop distributions are so inspiring. You didn't close the loop. Does your mom talk to you now?
So my mom passed away a couple weeks ago.
A couple weeks ago. Yeah. I'm sorry. Well, sorry.
No, it's it was. I was fortunate to be there with her and all that. My mom did some of the early research with me, and yes, we put the relationship back together. I was on her side. I was actually telling my dad, "You've got to stop putting money in." And we sat at the kitchen.
You just opened the door. Sorry, I feel like I put my foot in my mouth. But
no, but it was funny because I agreed with my mom. I'm like, Dad, he was like 65 at the time. Like, you can't go earn a living again. You're going to get wiped out. And that's when he pointed out the obvious to me. He said, Rick, we owe the bank $1.5 million. I have $500,000 left to my name. We have passed the point of no return. I'm putting the 500 in because if we don't, it's the bank's money anyway. And you're going to figure this out. And then
what an unbelievable story. Unbelievable story. We did get one. We have one last, but we did get one online. People want to know: have you ever been tased?
7 times, and I'm done. It is not fun. But I would tell you, I would do it again before I get pepper sprayed. It's like the taser shot. It's 5 seconds. It sucks. You fall down. It's the worst part is you feel helpless because your body is just doing things you can't stop it from doing. But when it's over after 5 seconds. But if you've ever seen somebody pepper sprayed, oh, that's like an hour of agony. And I hate pain.
All right. Well, last question. We'll let you get back to it. As you learned a little bit about us and the urban complex, is there anyone you think we should have on as the guest that can help advance the smart cities movement or just inspire our audience?
I actually think Peter Diamandis would be a good guest. He is part of Singularity. He co-founded Singularity University, and I just find him such an inspiring leader when it comes to tech. So he could be a great guy to reach out to.
Do you still have a relationship? We'd love an intro.
I do. Yeah. Let's follow up by email afterwards. I can connect you with him.
Awesome. Thank you. And with that, the Urban Complex gives a big note of thanks to today's guest, Rick Smith, CEO and founder of Axon and author of The End of Killing. Thanks, Rick.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you.
Whew. All right, Dom. I knew Rick was going to be good. I know that's the first you've really met him. What did you think? Did he hit the mark?
Completely. I mean, incredible story, both personally and professionally. What he's done at Axon is just really remarkable. And I love all the synergies there is between, yes, he's a private industry company, public company in smart cities, and what cities are trying to go through with the whole smart city movement and pivoting, trying to leverage technology in new ways to transform 100-year-old city departments and city services. It's a very difficult process, but I think if you're a city manager, if you're a CIO, if you're a police chief, and you're listening to the story, the entrepreneurial story of Rick, you're going to get a lot of takeaways from how you can apply the entrepreneurial mindsets to your internal organization, your internal services, to really drive change. And I especially love the idea of, how even them as a private company were worried about the public reaction to the AI use in their body cameras, and how he proactively got out in front of it and created an AI steering committee or an AI committee to look at it as an independent group to help provide them with advice on how to leverage that technology. He said, we took a step back. Doesn't mean we're not going to use it in the future, but we realized that it just wasn't the right time to use it. And I think that's a huge story and a huge advice for any city managers, any city leaders that are looking to potentially use AI, and how they might leverage, standing up an organization, a committee to look at it, to provide them independent advice before they move forward. And like he said, before they move forward and realize something they didn't understand, didn't know, and then it's almost a career-ending, failure. So ways to be proactive. I thought that was huge advice, and I think a lot of people are going to benefit from it.
Yeah, change needs courageous leadership. And he had story after story after story of courageous leadership. I mean, he didn't even know what the cloud was until their board member came and like, what? You built a data center? No, we need to get out of business. And they had just made an $8 million investment as a somewhat small public company. And he said, you know what? You're right. And he learned about it, dug in, made the stand, told the public. I'm sure the stock got hit, and that is courageous leadership. And the story about his personal journey of 28 years of pain, of finding this patent from a NASA, like, I don't know, we're entrepreneurs. It just resonates so much. But the same thing, like both of us have day jobs, and in our own way, we're entrepreneurs at our companies. And while we take these risks, we do it in a way where we build consensus with our leadership. We help show a path, and neither one of us do it where we're saying we got to do that thing that's 3 years down the road and we got to do it huge and we need $20 million. No, we say that's where we're headed, but we're going to get this one step forward, and it just gets movement. And that's what this is all about. It's being a courageous leader and showing a different direction and building buy-in and getting people to feel confident, and then leveraging those small wins to get bigger wins. I mean, look at that. They started as a one-trick pony, TASER. But look at them now. They completely changed the name. They saw all this opportunity. They listened to their customer, and they realized, hey, we could try this thing. Could you imagine what it would be like in a police force to be the first ones to use that video camera? And like, you're ratting on me, or who knows what was going on. But look at it. Like, it's had these amazing impacts on police departments around the world, for that matter. And they just have so much structure. It's really fun to hear.
Yeah.
It just got my mind flowing.
Totally. And, and me being that kind of local government guy, you're talking about courageous leadership. Well, how do you train that in your, employees? How do you train that in your middle managers? I'm hoping, I think 2 years ago when I was with the nonprofit IDP, we tried to stand up a program with ASU at the time called Public Entrepreneurial Development Academy, right? Teaching these entrepreneurial skills that come naturally to people like Rick, but, teach that mindset to public leaders. And it's a difficult mindset to learn because you're working in organizations that are 100 years old, that have structure and process for a reason, transparency, you name it. I'm hoping that, that program, we will follow up with that gentleman that he mentioned. Maybe is that a program that we could send public?
Great point. Yeah, like get people to see. So what Peter Diamandis is all about is this abundance theory. He's not an incremental growth guy. He's like, I'm a 10x person, and I'm going to get you to see how you can go from this to this, not from this to this. Don't get me wrong. Like we talked about in a prior episode, incremental change is important, but exponential change is sometimes important too. And that's what Rick was just super exhilarated about. It was just a lesson.
So, I mean, that's a dream of mine. Maybe we can see, city managers, CIOs, public servants sitting next to private industry partners in these, entrepreneurial classes and in these kind of professional development courses, learning from each other. But I think that's what really helped catalyze change. So, all right. So now let's move on. Let's talk about cracks in the pavement, right? Anything new come across your desk this week that you want to chat about? Cracks in the pavement?
Well, first of all, cracks in the pavement. Did we call it? I mean, you're in a haunted mansion and your lights go out. What was that about?
The headless horseman must have rode by. I know I was trying not to see. All of a sudden, I went in the dark and I had to scoot up to the camera to see.
We thought you were the ghost for a second.
Oh, I know. Of course, I was trying so hard not to laugh because I was like, oh my goodness, it just went out. So I don't know.
And by the way, this haunted hotel in Jerome is amazing. Jerome's a great place. If you live here in Arizona or you don't, amazing place to go. And you better tell them and get a free night. Yeah. All right. So, the one thing that is really interesting, we talked about this in a prior episode, the Cisco announcement.
Oh, yeah.
I know it was a big part of the ASU Winter Games. It came up a few times. We talked about it after the Jim Daniels episode. And sure enough, they just came out today. Recently, I guess, is Cisco, sure enough, they are not getting out of the business of smart cities. You can't. Infrastructure is so critical. If you're going to connect, think about the way Rick talked about Axon. It's a nerve center, and you have to collect data, and you have to send data. That takes a powerful network. That takes powerful connectivity. It takes infrastructure. We do a lot of work with some of these next-gen 5G carriers. Everything's being laid where this is a reality, and Cisco's not getting out of this business. So we didn't think so at the time. Of course, the media picks up on it. In fact, it was interesting hearing Rick in the episode talk about how when they went and did some of this AI stuff, they just got land-based. That's what media does. Again, back to courageous leadership. If you're going to solve the cracks in the pavement, you have to know where you're going and be there. That's kind of my take on it. How about you, Don?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. You have to know where you're going. I think we talked about this with Tempe. You have to have that plan that you can always revert back to in case something media spins it in a new, unique way. No, you can always go back to that plan. And I think you're right. It just, again, shows the importance of this digital infrastructure. And I know you and I, both in our day jobs, are very excited with, upcoming federal stimulus money that's coming down the pipeline. This is our opportunity as cities everywhere, as states, to really, really think strategically about how we're going to leverage this funding to build the digital infrastructure that's going to, as you just mentioned, exponentially power us for the next not only years, but decades to come. If we don't get this right, we really, really miss the boat. So I think it's going to be an exciting time, and I think it's a relevant topic right now.
Yeah, amazing. All right, well, that is a wrap on another The Urban Complex episode. You can find us on the Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Super helpful, all you joining our Twitter pages, LinkedIn pages, Facebook pages, giving us all those 5-star ratings out there. We're super honored. We love your comments. Keep asking the questions. It can be questions. We pre-announce who our speakers are going to be. Ask us questions for the cracks in the pavement, we'll call you out and say thanks and bring that into the forefront. And then just keep up the support. We love it. You guys have been great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been good. Hopefully I see you on the next episode, but if not, the Headless Horseman must have got me, but it's been fun. See you next time.